If you have ever wondered, what do I do now? Then you can probably appreciate something of what I was feeling one Holy Week several years ago. It was Palm Sunday of Holy Week. And the church that I was serving at that time had a Palm Sunday celebration, much the way that we have here at this church. And as a part of their Palm Sunday celebration, they always had a Palm Sunday processional, but with a little bit of a twist. Instead of just the children and the clergy processing down the aisle of the church, the whole congregation waited outside, and then they all processed in together. Here's the way it worked. Every year on Palm Sunday, the church would get a live donkey, and then they would get someone to dress up like Jesus. Now, the church had a very large front lawn, probably the size of a couple of football fields together. And then Jesus would start out at the far left corner of the front lawn, and he would walk the donkey all the way up to the front door of the church where there was someone waiting, and when he got to the front door, someone would take the donkey off to the side. I don't know why, but the church didn't really want the donkey walking down the center aisle of the church. So there was someone there to take the donkey off to the side, and the congregation who had been waiting outside and waving their palm branches, waiting for Jesus to make his entrance, would then follow Jesus into the sanctuary. It was a nice touch, and things usually went pretty well. However, on this one particular Palm Sunday, a very interesting thing took place. Already hundreds of people were outside, and they were all waving their palm branches, and they were waiting for Jesus to lead them into the sanctuary. But apparently Jesus had wandered off without telling anybody where he was going. It actually turned out that he was doing what Jesus might actually have been doing. He was helping some of the seniors get out of their cars and navigate their way to the sanctuary. But as I say, he hadn't told anybody where he was going. So just a moment or two before the service began, one of the staff people, the one who was responsible for coordinating the whole processional, came running up to me, and she said, "Dan, we've got a problem. Jesus, he's gone. We don't know where to find him. What are we going to do?" Well, I didn't actually say this at the time, but I confess that at that moment I was thinking, what do you mean we, Kimosabi? How quickly can you get dressed up like Jesus? Well, fortunately, Jesus showed up right on cue, and the whole processional went off without a hitch. But later I couldn't help but wonder, what do you do next when Jesus seems to turn up missing? What do you do next when a loved one, a spouse or a parent or a child dies, and you're left standing in the debris of a broken heart? What do you do next when you're worried sick about the choices that your child is making, but your child has reached that age where you can no longer tell him, you can no longer tell her what to do? What do you do next when your marriage seems to have hit a wall and there are no more words to say? What do you do next when you have blown it colossally, and you stand guilty of your sin? What do you do next when life seems to leave you feeling overwhelmed and hopeless? This week, my daughter, Catherine, and her family have been staying at our house. They came to celebrate Easter with us, and as many of you who are in the congregation this morning know, Catherine and Scott have 3 children. There's Max, who's about 5 years of age, and then they have 2 identical twin 13-month-old daughters, Abby and Ellie. Well, this week, Ellie has really been out of sorts. She has been cutting her teeth, and she hasn't been able to sleep at night, and she's just been doing a lot of whining and crying. You'd be amazed how much whining and crying a child can do. And she's been doing some of that. And we have a dog, a black lab. His name is Boone. And Boone is a very sensitive animal. And so when somebody's not feeling well or something like that, Boone responds to that. And the way he responds to it is by licking you. And so all week he's just been licking Ellie all over the face. And you can appreciate how much Ellie has really appreciated Boone licking her face. I mean, just kind of added to the annoyance of the whole situation. And so the other day she was crawling across the floor. They've reached that age. And you know, you could just tell every movement was a challenge for her. And I was standing a few feet away from her, and at one point, she just kind of looked up at me with these pleading eyes. And I said, Ellie, what is it, honey? As if she could tell me what it was. But at that point, she just plopped her head right down on the floor and just started sobbing uncontrollably. Anybody ever felt like that? If you have, what do you do next? Where do you go to find the one who can save you from your grief and your pain and your hopelessness? Where do you go to find the one who can comfort you and give you courage and the strength to keep on going? I couldn't help but think about all of that this week as I reflected on our gospel lesson. According to Matthew, the women had gone to the tomb early that morning. These were the same two women that had been at the tomb just a couple of days earlier. They were the same women who had been there and watched Jesus die on the cross. They had watched Joseph of Arimathea take Jesus' body down from the cross, wrap it in clean linen, and then put it in a stone-cold tomb. And then they had been there and stayed and just kept watch just to be close to him until the Sabbath had dictated that they must leave. And so now as they returned to the tomb, they fully expected it to be exactly the way that they had left it. However, when they got there, it was not at all what they had expected. The guards who had been dispatched to make the tomb as secure as possible lay unconscious on the ground. The stone that had sealed the sepulcher had been rolled away, and on it was a messenger who was saying to the women, I know who you're looking for. You're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. Come and see the place where he lay. And had it not been for a couple of other things that also happened that day, I'm sure these women would have felt like saying, what do we do now? But you remember, as they turned from the tomb and they started to run, they encountered the risen Christ. And you remember that both the angel and Jesus had told them, go and tell my disciples to go into Galilee. There they will see me. Isn't that interesting? Isn't it interesting that Jesus told his disciples to go to Galilee and that was the place where they would see him? Why do you suppose that was true? What made Galilee so special? Why not Bethlehem? After all, Bethlehem was the place where Jesus was born. Why not Jerusalem? After all, they were already in Jerusalem. Why do you suppose that Jesus told the women to tell the disciples to go to Galilee, and that's where they would see him? The short answer to that question is simply this. For the disciples, Galilee represented the place where life and faith intersected with one another. Where life and faith intersected with one another. You remember it was in Galilee that the disciples had grown up and they lived and worked and made their homes. It was in Galilee that they had experienced the joys of life, but they also experienced the frustrations and the challenges and problems of life. But it was also in Galilee that they had first encountered Jesus and that their faith had first come alive. It was in Galilee that they made the decision to follow Jesus, and they first began to experience the life abundant. The last few days, the days of his denial and betrayal and the mistreatment and the crucifixion, had seemed to change all of that, but now it was Easter. And so when Jesus was telling the disciples to go into Galilee and that there they would see him, part of what he wanted them to see is that this was for them a new beginning. He was giving them a second chance. He was saying, if you will but have faith in me, if you will but trust in me, then it is there in the place where you live your everyday lives, there where you grow up and where you work and where you make your homes, that you will see me. I'm already there. I'm already at work. I'm already there. But if you will have faith, then you will see me there. And what Jesus said to the disciples so long ago, what the angel said to the disciples so long ago, I believe is the message for us today. All this week I've had in my mind a story that a friend of mine told me not long ago. It's actually a story that was very popular years ago when I first entered the ministry, but frankly, it's been so many years since I have heard it that I had nearly forgotten the story. The story has to do with a famous painting that is based on the legend of Faust's pact with the devil. According to the legend, Faust, in his greed for things, had traded away his soul to the devil, and the painting is based on that. The painting shows two men sitting at a chessboard. On one side sits Faust, and on his face is a look of complete horror. And on the other side of the chessboard sits the devil, and on his face there is a look of fiendish glee. And then at the bottom of the painting is the title, and it simply says, Checkmate. Checkmate. Well, one day, two men were in the art museum where this particular picture was being displayed. One of them happened to be an international chess champion, and so as they were looking at this particular picture, the international chess champion became intrigued with it. There was something about it that just caused him to want to study it. In fact, he became so engrossed in the picture itself that the friend who was with him grew impatient and asked him, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, there's something about this painting that bothers me." He said, "Listen, I want to study it a little while longer. You go on ahead and we'll catch up with one another a little bit later." And so the friend left, and the man continued to study the picture. And then after several minutes of studying that painting, the man started nodding his head, and he started waving his hands. His friend came back over to him, and as he did, the international chess champion said to his friend, he said, "We must locate the man who painted this picture. I must tell him something." And the friend said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, the title of the painting is Checkmate. But after studying the picture very carefully, I've discovered the king has another move." Listen, dear friends, some of you may have come to this sanctuary this morning, and you may be facing a situation that seems to be crying out to you, checkmate, checkmate. But it's Easter Sunday, and I want to announce to you the king has another move. You may feel overwhelmed by life, but don't despair. The king has another move. You may be worried sick about the choices your children are making, but don't be afraid. The king has another move. Your marriage may have hit a wall, but don't despair. The king has another move. You may have blown it colossally. You may feel that the only verdict with which you can live the rest of your life is guilty, but the king has another move. You may have had a loved one die, but don't cave in to hopelessness. The king has another move. So, what do you do next when Jesus seems to turn up missing? Where do you go to find him? The angel, the messenger. Jesus told the disciples to go into their Galilee, to go to the place where they live and work and make their homes, but to go there with faith. And if they would go there with faith, he's already there, he's already at work, but if they would go there with faith, then they would experience his comfort. They would discover new possibilities. They would experience his courage to keep on going. In other words, they would see him. And that, dear friends, is the good news for this Easter Sunday. Oh Lord our God, let the power of your resurrection and all the promises that are contained therein break in upon us in a fresh, new, and wonderful way. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our closing hymn is listed there in your bulletin. It is "Crown Him with Many Crowns." If you've ever found yourself asking the question, what do I do now? Then you can probably appreciate something of the feeling that I had one Holy Week several years ago. It was Palm Sunday, and the church that I was serving had a Palm Sunday celebration, much the way that we had here at this church last week. Each year on Palm Sunday, they would always have a Palm Sunday processional. But they did it with a little bit of a twist. Instead of just the children and the clergy processing into the sanctuary, the whole congregation waited outside, and then the whole congregation would process in together. Here's the way it worked. The church had a very large front lawn, probably the size of a couple of football fields put together. And every year they would get a live donkey, and then they would get someone to dress up like Jesus. And then from the far corner of the property, Jesus would walk the donkey all the way up to the front door of the church, where the whole congregation was waiting outside, waving their palm branches and so forth. And then when Jesus got to the door of the church, there was someone there to take the donkey and lead him off to the side. I don't know why, but for some reason, the church didn't want the donkey walking down the front center aisle of the church. So when they got to the door, there was someone there to lead the donkey off to the side. And then Jesus would walk in, and the whole congregation would fall in line behind him and take their places. It was a nice touch. And things usually went very well. However, on this one particular Palm Sunday, an interesting thing took place. Already hundreds of people had gathered outside. It was just a couple of minutes before the service was to begin, but apparently Jesus had wandered off and hadn't told anybody where he was going. Turned out Jesus was doing what Jesus probably would have been doing on that Palm Sunday. He was helping some of the seniors in the church get out of their car and find their way to the sanctuary. But as I say, he had neglected to tell anybody where he was going. And so there was this kind of panic that was taking place, and all of a sudden one of my staff members came running up to me, the one who was responsible for coordinating the whole processional, and she said, "Dan, we've got a problem. It's Jesus. He's gone. We don't know where to find him. What are we going to do now?" I didn't actually say this at the time, but I'll confess to you today that at that moment I was thinking, what do you mean we, Kimosabe? How long is it going to take you to dress up like Jesus? Well, fortunately, Jesus showed up on cue, and the whole thing went off without a hitch. But later, I found myself wondering, what do you do next when Jesus turns up missing? What do you do next when a loved one, a spouse, parent, a child, dies and you're left standing in the debris of a broken heart? What do you do next when you're worried sick about the choices that your child is making, but your child has reached that age where you can no longer tell him, you can no longer tell her what to do? What do you do next when your marriage has hit a wall and there seem to be no more words to say? What do you do next when you have blown it colossally and you stand guilty of sin? What do you do next when life itself has left you feeling overwhelmed and hopeless? This week, my daughter and her family have been visiting with us. They came in to celebrate Easter with us. And in fact, Scott and Catherine and their 3 kids and my son and daughter are here. Son and daughter-in-law are here at this service, Chris and Ashley as well, and all of the grandchildren. Well, anyway, as many of you know, Catherine and Scott have 3 kids, Max, who's about 5 years of age, and then 2 identical twin daughters that are 13 months of age, Abby and Ellie. Well, this week, Abby has just been out of sorts. I mean, she's cutting her teeth and she hasn't been able to sleep at night. And so that has just kind of built up, and she's been whining and crying all week long. You'd be amazed at how much a child can whine and cry. Not as much as your children, but, it can happen. But we also have a dog, a black Labrador. Boone is his name. And Boone has this sensitivity to when people are not feeling very well. And so all week he's been trying to help Ellie feel a little bit better. And the way he helps people feel better is he just constantly licks them. And so you can appreciate how much Ellie has appreciated Boone constantly licking her. I mean, it has just added to the whole annoyance of the whole situation. Well, the other day, Ellie was crawling on the floor. And you could just tell. I mean, again, she was crying. Every movement was a struggle. And all of a sudden, she looked up at me. I was standing just a few feet away, and she looked up at me, and she just had these pleading eyes. And I said, "Oh, Ellie, what is it, honey?" I would guess I was expecting her to tell me what it was. But all of a sudden, she just put her head down on the floor and started sobbing uncontrollably. Anybody in here ever felt like that? Well, if you have, what do you do next? Where do you go to find the one who can save you from your grief and your pain and your hopelessness? Where do you go to find the one that can comfort you and give you courage and the strength to keep on going? I couldn't help but think about that this last week as I reflected on our gospel lesson this morning. As Matthew tells it, the women had gone to the tomb early that morning, and these were the same 2 women who just a couple of days earlier had stood at the cross and watched Jesus die. They were the same 2 women who had watched Joseph of Arimathea take Jesus' body down from the cross and wrap it in linen and then place it in a stone-cold tomb. And then later they stayed at the tomb just to be with Jesus, at least until the Sabbath dictated that they could stay no longer. So now, on this first Easter morning, as they returned to the tomb, they expected it to be exactly as it had been when they left it. However, when they got to the tomb, it was not at all what they had expected. The guards that had been dispatched to the tomb to make it as secure as they could were all lying unconscious on the ground. The stone that had sealed the sepulcher was now rolled back, and on it was an angel, a messenger that was saying, I know you're looking for Jesus who was crucified. He's not here. Come and see the place where they lay. And had it not been for a couple of other things that took place that day, I'm sure that these women would have left that place saying, what are we going to do now? But you remember, as they turned from the tomb and started running away, they bumped into Jesus, who was now the risen Christ. And you remember that the angel and Jesus had both told them, go to the disciples and tell them to go to Galilee. And there, they will see me. Isn't that an interesting word? What do you suppose? Both the angel, and Jesus told the women to go to Galilee, that was the place where they would see him. What was so special about Galilee? Why not Bethlehem? After all, Bethlehem was the place where Jesus was born. That, of course, was a very special place. Why not Jerusalem? After all, they were already in Jerusalem. Why do you suppose they were told to go to Galilee? And that's where they would see him. The short answer to that question is that because Galilee was for the disciples the place where life and faith intersected. The place where life and faith intersected. You remember, it was in Galilee that the disciples grew up. It was where they worked. It was where they lived. It was where they made their homes. It was where they experienced the joys of life. But it was also the place where they experienced the challenges and the frustrations and the problems of life. It was also the place where they had first encountered Jesus and the place where their faith had first come alive. It was the place where they had made that decision to start following Jesus. And they had begun to experience life like they had never before known it. The last few days, the betrayal, the denial, the arrest, the mistreatment, the crucifixion, all of that had seemed to change everything. But now it was Easter. And so when the angel, when Jesus was telling these disciples to go to Galilee, that there they would see him, he was essentially saying to them, I'm giving you a new beginning. I'm giving you a second chance. If you will have faith in me, if you will trust in me, then it is there where you grew, where you live, where you work, where you make your homes. There, amidst all of that, you will see me. I'm already there. I'm already at work. But if you will have the faith, then you will see me. And what I think Jesus was saying to the disciples so long ago, I think is the message for you and me here today. All week I've had in mind a story that a friend of mine told me not long ago. It's actually a story that I had heard and was very popular when I first entered the ministry many years ago, but I haven't heard it in so long that I had nearly forgotten it. The story has to do with a very famous painting about the legend of Faust's pact with the devil. According to the legend, in his greed for things, Faust traded away his soul to the devil. And the painting is based on that legend. The painting shows two men sitting at a chessboard. On one side is Faust, and on his face there is a look of complete horror. And on the other side of the chessboard is the devil, and on his face is a look of fiendish delight. And then as you look down at the bottom of the painting, there's the title of it. And the title of it is simply Checkmate. Checkmate. Well, one day two men were in the art museum where this very famous painting was being displayed, and one happened to be an international chess champion. And so as they looked at this painting, the international chess champion became intrigued with it. In fact, he became so engrossed in it that his friend grew impatient. And he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, there's something about this painting that is bothering me, and I want to study it for a little while longer. You go on ahead, and we'll catch up a little bit later." And so his friend went on, and he stayed there and studied it for a long while. And then all of a sudden, he started nodding his head, and he started waving his hands, and his friend came over to him, and as his friend came over to him, he said to him, he said, "We must locate the man who painted this picture. There's something I must tell him." And his friend said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, you'll notice that the title of the painting is Checkmate. But," he said, "after studying this picture, I've discovered the king has another move." Listen, dear friends, some of you in here this morning may have come to this place facing a situation in life that is crying out to you, checkmate. But it's Easter. And I'm here to announce the good news that the king has another move. You may feel overwhelmed with life right now, but don't give up. The king has another move. You may be facing a marriage that has hit the wall. Don't cave in to hopelessness. The king has another move. You may be worried sick about your children, but don't be afraid. The king has another move. You may feel that the only verdict you will have to live with for the rest of your life is the verdict guilty. But don't despair. The king has another move. You may have had a loved one die, and you may feel at the end of your rope. But believe this, the king has another move. So, what do you do next when Jesus seems to turn up missing? The word the angel had, the word that Jesus had for the disciples is go to your Galilee. Go to the place where you live and work and where you have your homes and you have your families. Go to the place where you experience life's joys and life's struggles and life's celebrations and life's challenges and frustrations and problems. Go there. But go there with faith that I am alive. Go there trusting that I have a way forward for you. I'm already there. I'm already at work. But if you will go with faith, if you will go with trust, then you will begin to experience my comfort. You will begin to discover new possibilities. You will begin to have the courage to go on. In other words, if you go with faith, you will see me there. And that, dear friends, is the glorious good news on this Easter Sunday. Our gracious and loving God, may the power of your resurrection break in upon us in a fresh and wonderful way. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Our closing hymn is Crown Him with Many Crowns. Now, before you stand, I want to invite anyone who